Our story this morning is from the book of Genesis, and it's a story about Jacob, and we've already hinted at what it might be. But just a little bit of background, because Jacob's story is a long one, and you know that part of the story is that Jacob kind of pulls a fast one on his brother Esau and gets his father's birthright, and Esau and Jacob weren't too happy, and so they were at odds, and Esau was even threatening Jacob's life. And so Jacob's mother suggested that he go off and actually in that process get a wife, but he sent him off to another place. And so this story begins as part of this journey that Jacob is on the road to another place, partly to save his own life. And it says that at a certain point in the journey he stopped to rest for the night, and he took a stone and he used it as a pillow, and he lay down and he lay his head on the stone and he went to sleep. And he had one of those dreams. He had a dream that there was a ladder, a kind of stairway, and it was going straight to heaven. And there were angels that were going up and down the ladder, up and down the ladder. And suddenly God was right there in front of him, and God said, "You are a favored one. You and your descendants are going to be blessed by people all over the world. You're going to have so many descendants that they're going to be like grains of dust on the ground. They're going to come from the east and the west and the north and the south, and all peoples coming from all directions will be blessed by you and your descendants. I'm giving you this land that you are on right now. I am giving you this land to you and your descendants, and I'm going to be with you until all the things that I have said are going to be true actually come true." And Jacob awoke from this dream, and he was amazed. And that place of amazement that is right next to fear and awe and terror. And he said, "God is amazing. God is wonderful, and God is in this place. Little did I know that this was holy land, connected almost directly to heaven. This is a special place, and I devote myself to God and God's purpose." And he took the stone that he had rested his head on, and he uprighted it in that spot and anointed it as a special place. And he said, "This place will now be called Bethel," a special holy place symbolizing Jacob's connection to God and God's commitment to Jacob and all his descendants.
My first real bike was a birthday present from my parents for my 7th birthday. It was a beautiful sky blue, kind of an electric blue Roadmaster. Did anyone have a Roadmaster? And it had fat, little, round tires and a huge wire basket in the front between the handlebars, and those wonderful little kind of confetti things that came out of the handlebars to look really cool. My dad made sure that the training wheels were in place on the bike so that he could help me take my first ride on my birthday. I remember getting up on the seat and immediately sensing the power of the bike beneath me as I placed my feet on the pedals and I tried to ride away. Like all kids, I wobbled a bit at first. Do you remember that moment? And then I felt and I found the power and the center of balance. Finding that place between balance and power is the secret to riding a bike, as many of us know. And as a child, it's not easy to discover. So it takes a while before we're really able to ride a bike without training wheels. But once you discover it, once you discover how to ride a bike, the world awaits. Once I got the hang of it, my bike, Bluebird was her name, my bike was my ticket to ride. I rode her to school. I rode her out where the railroad tracks were and rode beside the railroad tracks for miles. Sometimes on a Saturday I would do my chores and I would end up getting on my bike and riding to my grandmother's house to surprise her and have lunch. Sometimes I rode at night if I could sneak out of the house for a good little ride. And even as a child, and maybe this is when I started singing to the stars, a habit that I still have to this day. Now, I haven't been on a bike very much as an adult. Living in the Bay Area and being the pastor to this congregation where many of you have had great bicycle accidents, I never really thought about riding a bike. It was either too dangerous, it felt too dangerous, or I felt like I just didn't have time to develop that kind of practice and that kind of habit. So I never even thought that much about getting on a bike. I never thought about riding, although there were people riding all around me. I thought that maybe my bike riding time was just a childhood thing. But about a year ago, I started fantasizing about getting on a bike again. I love watching the Tour de France. Is anyone watching it in the congregation? It's happening right now. And I think when those riders go through the French Alps and they look so intense and they're so stringy and strong, it made me want to get on a bike. So I began to think of ways that I might get on a bike again without embarrassing myself or putting others at risk. So I Googled bike trips, and I found one on the internet that I signed up for and signed Sam up for. It was a bike and barge trip from Amsterdam to Bruges. Now, after I did this, I kept pretty quiet because I sort of thought something would happen and, maybe I could get out of it or it would be canceled. But then as things went on, it didn't cancel and I was still registered to go. So I thought I'd better get a bit more serious about the bike, but I still wasn't quite ready to do it. But I do have a stationary bike at home and I rode it for a half an hour, maybe every other day. I still kept quiet about going. And suddenly the day arrived. So we flew to Amsterdam, and a day later we ended up rolling our suitcases up the plank, and it felt like a plank, to the barge. Our tiny room was down a steep set of stairs with open portholes just above the waterline. So we chugged out of the Amsterdam harbor for about 2 hours, and we docked in a quiet suburb for the night, and I still hadn't been on a bike, so it was still okay. The next morning, we were given helmets and a bike, which would be our very own bike throughout the week. And so without much fanfare or instructions, the group set off for the first day to ride about 35 miles. I was terrified. Would I be able to ride that far? Would I fall sometime that day? I just knew I was going to. Would I always be the last person in line? Would I remember how to ride a bike? And what about the pain? It would be, I thought, fun if I could ever get to the feeling of fun. But I'd forgotten about fun and joy and the freedom that I had experienced so long ago. I simply wanted to survive the ordeal that I had voluntarily decided to put myself through. I'm glad to report that a week and about 200 plus miles later, I made it through. So did Sam to Bruges. Not only did I get to fulfill a dream of getting back on the bike, but I fell in love with it all over again. The joy of it, the incredible sense of freedom, the feeling of flying through space and time, even the incredible body aches and pain that I'm still experiencing. as we stumbled into our cabin after a long day, and I was telling people that sometime we would be so tired at the end of the day, we would get on the barge, park our bike, get on the barge, creep down those stairs, and fall asleep on our beds with our helmets still on. It all came back to me, that joy, that freedom, as if in a dream. And there was a sense in being on that bike, in the entire experience, a sense of feeling that the presence of God is here, aiding me as I pedaled, cheering me on as I faltered, even helping me to navigate through narrow paths and stony roadways. Sometimes there were long miles of silence when no one spoke and no one paid attention to anybody else, and the only thing that mattered was just making it through. There were other times when I felt like, and I pulled away, singing for the joy and the freedom of it. One of my favorite expressions throughout my life has been, the glory of God is the human being fully alive. I felt fully alive riding that bike, and full moments of feeling the fullness of the glory of God in my own being. I return to earth. I return to earth, refilled and refreshed by the daily dream and the memory of freedom and joy, although I never left the ground at all. Out there in the darkness, in the middle of nowhere, Jacob had a dream. In it, there were messengers scurrying back and forth between heaven and earth, traveling up and down Jacob's beautiful ladder. When he awoke from the dream, Jacob says, "Surely God is in this place, and yet I did not know it." What began as ordinary, with only a stone for a pillow, ends up being a place where God is alive and present to a person in an extraordinary and profound way. As he awakes, Jacob is so full of the dream, he poured oil onto a rock and gave the rock the name Bethel, which means very simply, house of God. Do you know Bethel in your life? Is there a place or a time or an experience or a dream of God which is so real to you, so utterly opening and powerful that you cannot forget it, and it fills every moment of your imagination and your dreams? A moment, a time when you can remember the sun on your face, the wind at your back, even the strange sensation of your head maybe resting on a stone. Bethel, that place where we know that God simply is present. Jacob was so moved by God that he named a place so that he would never have to forget it, and he would always be able to go back to that place, Bethel, even if it was only in his mind. For many of us, I'm afraid it is a more mundane and average life. We don't have time for dreams, and it is not easy to remember them if we do come across a good one every once in a while. Our lives are simply too busy, managing, organizing, working, trying to make a living, scrambling to relax at the end of a long day or a long week. We simply fill up time with tasks, because that is what we're supposed to do. But in order to dream as Jacob did, you must be able to stop all of the above and find a different place every now and then, a different rhythm, a moment out of time in order to discover and to open to the house of God right where you are. When Jacob dreamed his dream, he was in an unholy place. It was not a holy place. He was out in the middle of nowhere, and he was on the run from a life in which he had lied and cheated his way into a birthright. People were after him. He was spiritually exiled, and he was lost to himself and to those he loved the most in the world. In some ways, he had no right to the dream. He had no right to the dream he was given. But our dreams come to us at the strangest times, and they can save us from the way things are by helping to open us up to the way things ought to be, if only our dreams could take hold. In Jacob's time, dreams were seen as a doorway into the holy. They were seen as a way to come into the realm of God. The conversation between God and God's people was active and alive, and dreams were the way that people heard what God had in store for them. It was also a way to receive instructions about how to behave on earth. In those times, people believed that God spoke directly to them in the midst of a dream. It wasn't a symbol, it was a direct conversation. Our understanding of the holy in our time is much more limited, and I fear often much more practical. We worship a block away from one of the world's greatest universities. And so we are constantly in a conversation with ourselves where we're reminded to rely on our brains to tell us what to do, who to be, and how much we can handle. We know how to think, we think, and what to expect, and we've learned never to over-trust our dreams or our visions. It simply isn't realistic or practical. Theologian and preacher Barbara Brown Taylor asserts that we've lost confidence in our dreams. We no longer trust our ability to see and dream and imagine a world as different than what the world is. We don't trust easily in the presence of God becoming as real to us as a hand on our shoulder or a voice in our ear. We are way too dedicated to the practical, the real, the necessary, and the ordered. But what if we could pull apart? What if we could walk out into a back field and place our head on a stone for a night, or put a foot on a pedal and ride apart? What dream would we have? How would God infuse our reality? Would we be able to dream a dream of a world once again whole and aching to be healed? Would we see a flock of messengers moving between heaven and earth, reminding us of God's vision for a peaceable world where the lion and the lamb, the Palestinian and the Israeli live together, work together, even send their children to the same schools together, and live in the same neighborhood? What is the dream that is waiting to come to fruition for our ravaged earth? Can we dream this morning a dream for the children at the border? It is not a bus that will take them back over the border again. That's not in my dream. But what do we dare to dream for them? What do we dare to say to them about God's presence? What have we not allowed ourselves to feel or think or dream because we've not allowed ourselves to imagine or vision or get in touch with God's desires? Could we dream a dream of compassion and justice and kindness, a dream that we haven't seen or felt yet? Could we dream a new way to move forward rather than simply allowing ourselves to cope with the way things are? I believe that a church is Bethel. A church is the house of God. In God's house, we get to do things differently. Instead of getting stuck in policy or expediency or even the way things always have been, the church gets to dream of new ways to be. The church gets to be that place in society to have the humility to recognize blind spots and the courage to ask God to heal us, even as we seek a way towards helping to aid in the healing of others. People of God get to refuse to be practical or realistic. People of God instead get to recognize God in our lives as incitement to place our energies upon our highest values: awe, wonder, amazement, radical justice. Imagine a world where God is Bethel, where God is truly present, creating night visions and making shalom. God's vision for a whole and healed people is part of the reason we come to church. We want to understand and embrace a different kind of world, a different kind of dream. We want this to be a place where we can listen for the voice of God. And when you read that text, God is so present and loving and caring of Jacob. God says to Jacob, I am with you. I will give to you. I will be present to you. I will not leave you. Jacob awoke from his dream and he knew instantly, because he heard that message, that God was in that barren place. God is present in the most difficult and awful places on our planet. God is present. This morning, God is present in the Gaza Strip. God is present in Murrieta, in Baghdad, in the tragedy in Ukraine. But God is not merely present in all those places. God has a dream, a vision for those places and for all people. God's desire is peace, justice, kindness, compassion, and love. Not merely for one or two of us, not only for the chosen or for the well-behaved. God's dream is for all families, all peoples on the earth. And so we know Bethel is not a single place where oil is poured. God's Bethel is everywhere we dare to pour healing oil on broken hearts. May we be brave and bold enough to dream God's dream, God's vision, God's prayer for the world. Amen.